Members of an alleged foreign hit squad accused of carrying out a brazen public assassination on Canadian soil are now in police custody. But are there links to a foreign intelligence agency? What does it mean for our national security? I'm Mercedes Stephenson. The West Block starts now.
Suspects were arrested and charged for their alleged involvement in the killing of Mr. Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Arrests in the politically charged murder happened after months of investigation. Who are the alleged killers and how did they get into Canada? We'll ask Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc. And the highly anticipated report on foreign interference is now out, and it says more needs to be done. But what will that look like? It was a stunning coordinated hit when a Canadian Sikh activist was shot and killed in a Surrey, BC parking lot. Now the details that are coming out about that assassination are even more stunning.
I'm here today to announce that we arrested and charged 3 individuals for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in relation to Hardeep Nijjar's homicide.
Sources familiar with the investigation have told Global News the 3 men entered Canada on student visas and that the RCMP is now investigating whether the Indian government may have played a role in hiring them. At the time, the killing sparked a diplomatic crisis between India and Canada.
Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty.
These arrests happened on the same day as it would be as the release of the long-awaited first report on foreign interference from the public inquiry. Joining me now to talk about this is Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Minister LeBlanc, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Mercedes.
Obviously, a pretty remarkable day on Friday. 3 arrests of people who are alleged to be assassins who carried out what the government has said is a plot by the Indian government to assassinate a very well-known Sikh activist. Obviously, this raises a lot of concerns, not the least of which is that the 3 men were allegedly here on foreign student visas. Are you concerned about the level of penetration of potential foreign agents who might want to kill Canadians who are here on our soil?
We have said for a number of months that there was some credible intelligence linking this to the government of India. The Prime Minister said that in September. You'll appreciate, Mercedes, that this is now an active RCMP file. The investigation is ongoing. The RCMP explained on Friday that this is not the end of their investigation. They're continuing to do separate and distinct investigations, and these matters are going to be before a criminal court. So I want to be very careful in offering views on issues like the status of these people who were charged.
I imagine your government must know, though, how they came to Canada.
Again, this may be an interesting part of a future criminal trial, but I would not want to do or say anything that would prejudice the ability of prosecutors to successfully conduct this case.
Does it raise concerns for you about whether there's enough due diligence being done on people who are coming to Canada on foreign student visas?
Again, the Immigration Department can speak to how the visas are issued. I know that the Immigration Department works with security and intelligence agencies in these cases and has for a long time in the thousands and thousands of these files that are reviewed. That's an ongoing process, and obviously I have confidence in the Security and Intelligence Service that would work with the Immigration Department.
I want to ask you about your confidence in Security and Intelligence Services. There was a warning given to the man who was murdered, but the police were not able to save his life. In the United States, they were able to prevent an assassination. What's being done to try to prevent this from happening again? And are you concerned about whether or not the RCMP and CSIS have enough resources to protect people in Canada?
I have a lot of confidence in the work that the RCMP does and their CSIS partners. We recognize that this was a tragic murder that took place last June. The RCMP will obviously be, as part of their investigation, working with the prosecutors, and all of the evidence around those issues may possibly be introduced in a criminal trial. So again, it's a difficult moment, Mercedes. You'll appreciate, you follow these issues a lot. for the minister responsible for the RCMP to offer views on specific elements of the police work or the police investigation isn't appropriate. I know that the RCMP take this work very seriously. I'm working with them. Your question about resources, they could always use additional resources across the country and various investigations and divisions. I'm glad that we made increased investments in the budget last month, but I work with Commissioner Dem and his team all the time to identify opportunities where the government can continue to support this good work.
Have you spoken to your Indian counterpart about this?
I have not.
What do you plan to say to him?
I have not spoken to him, and again, I don't know what I would say to him about an ongoing police investigation or a criminal proceeding. The Foreign Affairs Department has contacts with counterparts in India, but I have not spoken to my counterpart in the Indian government at all.
When you look at this scenario, part of what we've had sources tell us is that the Indian government had tried for quite some time to convince the RCMP to arrest Mr. Nijjar and to extradite him, and that some of the evidence that was being presented was really not credible, and there was concerns that it would be or would have been obtained under torture. Are you familiar with whether or not the Indian government has attempted that with any other Canadian citizens, and are you concerned that they could be at risk as well?
We're always concerned around protecting the Indo-Canadian community here. I have colleagues and friends in that community that understandably share their concern around community safety issues. It's not the only community in Canada that has these concerns. We've seen the Jewish community, we've seen the Muslim community, we've seen communities for a bunch of international geopolitical reasons feel under increased threat. It's something we worry about. It's something we work with those communities all the time, trying to improve their ability in terms of protecting their meeting places.
So why do you think so many other countries sort of seem to see Canada as a place of impunity where they can carry out this kind of foreign interference, whether it's electoral or assassinations?
Well, I would think if you saw the arrest made Friday and listened carefully to the comments of the Assistant Superintendent of Federal Policing for the Pacific region, it's the exact opposite of impunity. The RCMP are very much at work and doing very good work in this regard. We have an obligation to investigate these criminal activities, and the RCMP will do that work, and the prosecutors will do their work as well. So I think it's the opposite of impunity. I think that what we saw is a first step in holding to account those that allegedly murdered a Canadian citizen, and that work continues.
On Friday, we also saw the first report from the Commission looking into foreign interference come out. One of the things that struck me about it is that Justice Hogue said that clearly security officials and elected officials have very different views on the significance of foreign interference, that the intelligence officials seemed perhaps much more concerned. And you saw that in the testimony, where there was a number of folks from your government and your party, elected officials or senior staffers, who said they were aware of things, but they weren't very concerned. Those who were testifying from CSIS and the RCMP were quite concerned with what they'd been hearing. Do you think that your party has been taking this seriously enough or brushing it off when it suits you?
On the contrary, again, I think our government and our party is the only government that has put into place a series of measures that we've continually strengthened since 2018.
And I know you guys always go back.
None of these measures existed previously.
But they haven't stopped it. They haven't stopped it, and there's evidence that you were confronted with all of this information by CSIS, and that senior officials determined it wasn't a big deal.
Again, haven't stopped it. This is a challenge that I spoke to the UK Home Secretary about, Mr. Cleverly, the Homeland Security Secretary of the United States. We're not the only Western democracy that's facing this challenge. We think we have put in place a series of measures that have been effective. Can they be strengthened? Can they evolve based on the recommendations of the Hogue report? Of course they can. But I have every confidence that the Liberal Party takes these issues very seriously. The Prime Minister and I are in a number of meetings where security and intelligence officials share this information with us. And as I say, it is a challenge. It's an evolving threat. It's pervasive. It targets diaspora communities in Canada, but we're going to continue to do everything we can do to detect and disrupt this foreign interference. And we're the first government that has put in place a series of measures, including the report of Commissioner Hogue, the preliminary report that was released on Friday.
Justice Hogue flat out said that the government has not done enough. You still don't have a foreign agents registry. How long? Well over a year since promising one. So you're saying you're doing enough, but the action following through seems to be absent. And one of the other questions has been, of course, around Mr. Handong and whether you would allow him back into caucus. Based on what you saw in this report, I know you said on Friday that no decision had been taken. There was not enough in there for you to make a decision one way or another?
You asked three questions. I obviously don't share your view that the Hogue government, that the Hogue Commission said that the government has not done enough. The Hogue Commission identified a number of areas where this is an ongoing challenge, and we look forward to recommendations to strengthen the measures. I put on notice in the House of Commons on Friday our intention to introduce legislation very soon that will strengthen our ability to detect and disrupt foreign interference. So in terms of your question about strengthening legislative measures, I hope in the coming days I'll be able to talk once it's introduced in Parliament about the details of this legislation. And with respect to Mr. Dong, we have nothing to add in terms of his our decision as to whether or not he comes to the Liberal caucus again. The final report will only come out at the end of this year, and I saw Justice Hogue make very clear that she may arrive at certain conclusions in the final report that may not be reflected in the initial report, so we want to let that process continue.
Minister LeBlanc, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mercedes. Have a great day.
Up next, we get the inside scoop on what led to these arrests. The arrests in the murder of a Sikh leader on Canadian soil raise critical questions about Canada's national security. Joining me now to talk about this is Dan Stanton, a former agent at CSIS with 32 years in investigations, and Global News investigative journalist Stewart Bell. Stu, I want to start with you. Can you give us a little bit of context of what happened in this investigation, how the RCMP figured out who these three guys were and managed to penetrate this ring, as it were, and make the arrests?
Well, the RCMP, they've announced today they arrested 3 people this morning in Edmonton. They're all Indian nationals, we understand, and they were in Canada on student visas, and they arrived sometime within the last couple of years. And from what we understand from the charges and our sources is the allegations that they were the hitmen who conducted the shooting in the parking lot of the temple in Surrey. And they came from out of province to do that, and then left, went back to where they were. So, you know, it's the first, the police were quite careful today to say this is the first layer of the investigation. The shooters, there's still a number of investigations going on into other suspects, and the RCMP even went so far today as to say that includes the possible connection to the government of India.
Which, of course, is quite significant, Dan, that possible connection to the government of India. In a similar case in the United States, the Indian government has essentially been trying to say this is a rogue agent. A lot of experts in the field say it's not a rogue agent. It's actually a part of Indian foreign policy now, that we are seeing plots in a number of countries. What do we know so far about any potential connection between Indian intelligence and these 3 individuals who are in Canada on foreign student visas?
Yeah, well, there is an overlap, Mercedes, because when we look at the operation, the Indian intelligence operation in New York that was disrupted, there was an individual in India that was masterminding it. He was also privy to what was going on in Canada. He flipped a key video clip of Mr. Nijjar to this fellow named Gupta. So there seems to be elements in Indian intelligence linked to what went on in Canada, which is a much more massive conspiracy, I think, and what was attempted in New York, and the breadcrumbs are all leading back to New Delhi. It may very well be that it's intelligence that links them to the raw, and what we're seeing today with the arrests is the evidence that was collected on an actual homicide investigation. And so we can bridge the two at some point with evidence, then we'll tie that right into India.
Stu, as this investigation has been underway, you wrote a really interesting in-depth investigative piece on what the prelude was to the assassination and the Indian government's attempt to get the RCMP and the Canadian government to extradite Mr. Nijjar previously. What can you tell us about what led up to this brazen daylight execution?
Well, for almost 10 years, the Indian government had been asking Canadian authorities to arrest Mr. Nijjar, to extradite him. They put out an Interpol notice. They offered a reward. They outlawed him and his supposed organization that they claimed he belonged to. And they also claimed that he was about to commit an imminent bombing. So, but despite all of this, he was never charged here in Canada. We did learn that he was picked up on one occasion, and that was because the Indians claimed that a bombing was about to occur. But from that, the RCMP, according to our sources, learned that the evidence that the Indian police had was really flimsy, and there were growing concerns about the strength of the evidence that were behind these allegations. Also, you know, the professionalism and competence of the Indian police, and also the concerns that we found some evidence to support this, concerns that some of the evidence was coming from coercive interrogations, torture, basically. So there was a long campaign by India. There was never any evidence, convincing evidence put forward that Mr. Nijjar was involved in terrorism. And so that, you know, that leads to the possible theory that they were after him because of his activism, that he was a vocal and popular leader within the Khalistan movement that is seeking a separate state for in the Sikh majority Punjab. And, you know, they viewed him as a threat because of that. And that's why they targeted him with disinformation and ultimately, it looks like, assassination.
Dan, why do you think that India would suddenly change position on this and go so far as to potentially kill citizens in friendly country soil who they are allies and get along with? Is there a belief that there is a sudden greater threat from the Khalistani movement? Is this an emboldened India as the only option to China in the region? What do you think the motivation is behind this for India?
It seems to be more that you know, India is looking for under the Modi government that sort of global reach that emerging powers have, and that's consistent also with the repression of religious minorities and dissent. It's becoming a more autocratic state. But it's almost as though India wants to be in the big boys club, meaning those states that can reach out, like Russia, like Iran, like a few others, and do these types of activities to send a message which brings a lot of capital back home in terms of elections and campaigns, showing that you can reach out and neutralize what they believe are national security threats, and that pays big dividends with the BJP party and the election.
Stu, do you get a sense from your sources that there are other Canadians who could be at risk in similar plots, or other individuals who have been brought into the country potentially under false pretenses, appearing to be international students who are in fact here for another purpose?
Well, I mean, as I said, today's announcement was the first layer of arrests only for the Nijjar killing. And don't forget that there have been other things going on and that are under investigation, including alleged plots to kill a number of other pro-Khalistan activists from the BC Lower Mainland. That investigation is still going on, and you know, we'll have to see if that leads to charges or not. You know, I guess the issue is whether or not India feels that it can continue to do this. And, you know, from all of the experts we spoke to, there doesn't seem to be any consequence for them. They quite well survived Prime Minister Trudeau's accusations that they may have been involved. They continue to deny any role. And they, as Dan said, they seem to reap the benefits domestically on the political front for appearing to be a strong government standing up to threats to the security of India. So, you know, without a downside, you know, and should, for example, diplomats in Canada be involved, they would have immunity, they wouldn't face prosecution. And the intelligence officers that may be orchestrating this from within India itself are probably not going to ever face charges. So the most Canada could do is ask India to prosecute them in India, and that's not likely to happen. So if there's no downside and India doesn't pay any penalty for assassinating Canadian citizens or in other countries, it's hard to see why they would stop.
Dan, what does this do to Canada's relationship with India and Canada in the region? We had this big Indo-Pacific policy. It seems like that may be a little more dead in the water every development that goes on. India is the alternative to China, and the U.S. wasn't too thrilled with Canada initially coming out with this publicly. So how do you see this playing out?
Well, I think it's the critical conundrum is what is more important, human rights, Canadians' safety, or that geostrategic political dimension where the Americans have basically moved on. They recognize the importance of the relationship with India, still holding them account, and like Saudi Arabia, moving forward. Canada is a middle power. We really don't have much leverage and much, to sort of bring to bear on it, other than our own police investigation, where perhaps for Mr. Nijjar's family there will be some sense of justice. But in the bigger scheme of things, and holding India to account and getting them to acknowledge it, I don't have a lot of hope for that.
Dan and Stewart, thank you both so much for joining us and for your insight into what is at play here. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll have a conversation about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the toxic drug crisis that has become a political wedge. Now for one last thing. Toxic street drugs are killing thousands of Canadians, and one need only look around their own town or city to see what's happening. And while everyone agrees that there is a problem, finding a solution has become a political wedge issue. Last week in the House of Commons, the leader of the opposition was kicked out after he used what the Speaker deemed to be unparliamentary language in criticizing the Prime Minister over his drug policy.
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
What triggered the exchange was missed by many, though. British Columbia's request to change its experiment with decriminalizing possession of hard drugs. While the intent was aimed at reducing harm for those suffering from addiction, there has been a problematic side effect. Concerns about public safety and disorder have emerged.
The public drug use that we were seeing, some of the problematic conduct that we were seeing in communities was unacceptable to British Columbians. It's unacceptable to me, and we had to address it.
The Conservatives say it is proof that drug legalization doesn't work.
Will he announce now that his experiment with legalizing hard drugs in BC is over?
From the beginning, we've been there to work on an evidence-based, science-based, compassionate public health approach to the opioid epidemic.
The decriminalization of hard drugs has always been intended to prevent the criminalization of the vulnerable, those who have addiction. But in the absence of clear policies and a multi-pronged approach, it has also created safety concerns. No government seems to have gotten to the bottom of the real issue, which is not simply crime, but more so mental health and homelessness. Until there's more attention on addressing those issues, partisan fighting over a politically divisive issue won't achieve the solutions that Canadians need. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.